Hello and welcome back to Stumbling Through Security, episode 004, with your host, Sean Goodwin. A lot's been going on since the last time I was able to sit down and record an episode. So I'm just going to jump right into this. I'll be referencing a lot of different links and resources. Show notes can be found at seangoodwin.blog/STS004. And so with that, the first thing I wanted to talk about was Wild West Hackin' Fest 2019. I was lucky enough to head back to Deadwood for a second time this year, and again, incredible conference. I did a quick blog post on my way home, pulling out some of the key talks and sessions I went to. I'll link to that in the show notes. But it's worth talking about again. I've been lucky to go to, a good number of conferences each year. And by far, Wild West Hackin' Fest is the most valuable for me. Not only is the content incredible, but the fact that they keep the attendance size, pretty low. I think there's around 800 people this year. Makes it super easy to get into the sessions you want to go to. Not once was I unable to get into a talk I wanted to, or even move throughout the halls, which is a pretty common issue at DEF CON, right? Trying to get to where you want to go takes time just because of how many people are there. What's also really great is, the content's awesome. So these speakers have all this great information. It's easy to sit down and chat with them after any of their sessions, or just pick their brain about anything. The main track area has all these tables that make it really easy to sit down and meet people, talk to them, whether you're working on the OSINT, the online scavenger hunt or the CTF, or just chatting with other people in the industry. I can't say enough good things about this conference. One of the things that's worth talking about, again, I wrote about this a bit in the blog post, but I was able to get into the Advanced Cubicles and Compromises workshop put on by Ian Mayer. And what this is, so Black Hills put out this incident response card game, similar to Dungeons and Dragons or some of the other card-based games where you're rolling a die to determine different actions, a while ago, called Cubicles and Compromises. They've since put out a newer one called Backdoors and Breaches that's been getting a lot of attention. That's also really worth looking at. But what Ian did was he took the Cubicles and Compromises game and then built out this really detailed, I guess you can call it either an expansion or, applied the NIST cybersecurity framework to this card game. What that allowed us to do was build out this scenario using the controls from the NIST CSF in as close to a real world situation as we can get, as far as having budget constraints and different business requirements. And he took us through this 5-day incident that we had to respond to without, going bankrupt or going out of business. He did such an awesome job putting together, the rule book and the prep work ahead of time, and then running us through the session. I've done, it's probably not even in the same ballpark as this, but, have put on some of these incident response sessions where we're helping folks, build out an incident response program and then actually take them through some tabletop scenarios. I learned a lot from this workshop in not only how to make the process more fun, because let's be honest, if you're sitting around tabletopping, your incident response plan, a lot of folks just talk through, okay, if we get a phishing email, how are we going to handle that? If we get a malware infection, how are we going to handle that, right? And that's, you're not getting a lot of value out of stuff like that. And I think gamifying it, you're going to get value because there's a bit of randomness introduced to the response process where you can play that what if game. So, okay, if we get a phishing email, well, we've got XYZ control to stop that. Well, you roll, a D20 and you roll a 4, that's not high enough to succeed. So, okay, what if that control doesn't work? And now you can start to talk through what your response activity would be like. The randomness is really good for that. But then what I thought was great was there was probably around 20 people in there. We all had to build our own business for the scenario, and we all chose different controls. So each time there was an event throughout each of the 5 days, we were able to talk to other people, in that workshop to figure out, well, what controls did you have in place? How did that help in this scenario? And we could kind of bounce ideas off each other with, well, is that really worth it? Are we getting the benefit we thought? Just really constructive conversations there. So that was awesome. Um, what I'd really like to see, Ian said he's gonna continue trying to offer this at some other conferences and keep putting on this workshop. So definitely keep an eye out for this offering at conferences you're going to. It was a great experience. All right. Speaking of how great Wild West Hackin' Fest is, rather than continuing to grow the conference, which we'd start to lose some of that small feel, right? Black Hills is actually starting up a second location. So March 10 through 13 of 2020, you can actually head to sunny San Diego, California, if a snowy Deadwood, South Dakota isn't your style. The CFP is open for that. So if you've got something cool to talk about, I definitely recommend pitching it there. They also have a new speaker track. So if you haven't given presentations before and you want to share something cool you've been working on in a 15-minute session, they've got that. I definitely recommend looking into that if you've got it in your training budget. So what else has happened since the last time I recorded? I finished the SEC 505 class with SANS, including the GCWN exam. Awesome class for anyone that's interested in understanding, how to secure an Active Directory environment or, automating some of those tasks with PowerShell. Jason did an incredible job with this class. I think so far, I think I've done 5 or 6 SANS classes with a GX exam. And I think this set of textbooks has been the most valuable to where, it's been a few weeks since I finished the class, and I've been going back at least twice a week to look up a reference I saw through the class and pulling out some of the resources linked in there. Incredible, just an incredible amount of information packed into those textbooks. If you think you've got a pretty good handle on that, but you're just interested in learning some of the PowerShell bits of this, sec505.com, sec505.com, links you to his GitHub page where he put a lot of the PowerShell scripts we discuss in class. They're pretty well commented, so you should be able to follow along what's going on there. You're certainly not getting all of the information you get from the class, but there's a lot of really interesting information in there. What was nice is that the class is designed around the NSA top 10 mitigations, the CIS critical security controls, and references the MITRE attack mitigations. So everything in there is super actionable. It's not, kind of checkbox stuff. Everything he's covering in this class, is mapping back to proven exploits and proven attacks. So really interesting stuff there. What was actually kind of fun timing was as I was going through this class, the GIAC advisory board actually had a number of threads around Active Directory security and related topics. So I kind of bookmarked a bunch of hyperlinks and resources I want to talk about here while I'm kind of on this kick of Active Directory security. Sorry about that. Apologies for the cold. Having a little one at home, I'm pretty sure just guarantees I have a slight cold or slight illness, for the next few years. The first interesting reference, I want to link to here is the Red Forest design, also known as the Enhanced Security Administrative Environment. And what's really cool here is that this Active Directory design takes the 3-ring approach to protecting your more critical assets, right? So you've got tier 0, internal, super critical devices, super high risk, That's really not many folks are in that environment. Moving out through tier 1 and tier 2 with essentially the untrusted or sometimes malicious end user workstations where we really don't trust those folks, and we can't necessarily trust the integrity of those devices. A really cool idea around building out the layers within your network. I think it aligns pretty well with that assumed breach mentality, right? Some of these folks are uh, designing their environments to protect the data against that internal threat or internal risk, whether intentional or not. So definitely worth reading that write up. Another thing to call out here is actually the, I guess, collection of pages for securing privileged access. So I linked to essentially the main page that they put together here. But what's nice is that Windows put together this three-step or three-phase approach to securing privileged access within your environment. If you want to search for it on the page, they call it their Securing Privileged Access Roadmap. On the three phases we have, phase one, they say you can do this in the first 30 days of deciding to kick off this project. This is meant to be the quick wins with meaningful positive impact, right? So you can flip a couple switches, really low effort, but start to get some immediate return. Things that are covered here, some of the examples: have separate accounts for your admins for different administrative tasks. Have a separate workstation. It could even be a virtual machine jump box for really critical tasks. And then looking at things like just-in-time local admin passwords, the Microsoft implementation being LAPS, or leveraging the identity attack detection from Azure ATP. A lot of the Azure ATP stuff works both in obviously hosted environments, but then in the hybrid or on-prem implementations as well. All right, so that's phase one. Phase two, they consider significant incremental improvements. So we're building off of that foundation of the quick wins. And we're looking at things like credential guard or starting to search our environment for leaked credentials, right? The hash sync from Azure. I can't believe how many folks haven't heard of this with how cool the technology is, right? So Microsoft is monitoring all these breached credentials, and you can more or less use that as a password filter in your domain. So you can identify if anyone in your environment is using a password that's been compromised, or if they're trying to change their password to a password that has previously shown up in a breach, you can stop that outright. It's awesome. Some of the other phase two controls are things like multi-factor authentication for admins and the lateral movement detection capabilities. More advanced projects, but certainly providing a serious reward. Phase three, they label their security improvement and sustainment. Right? So these are really, let's hammer these things home. Let's reduce the attack surface for these machines we've just secured. For the leaked credentials, let's actually start to automate the password rotation, forcing password changes if they get a hit through hash sync, and use that self-service password reset functionality. It's available. Start to integrate role-based access control for different tiers, linking back to that Red Forest approach, and starting to actually integrate all of these systems into a SIM to monitor your event logs. A ton of awesome resources linked through here. These TechNet articles, it's kind of a rabbit hole that doesn't end, right? You start clicking through some of these reference links, and you can spend all week there. But the securing privileged access is definitely something worth looking into. And that's kind of a common theme with a lot of these resources I'll have in the show notes here. The next, reference page I came to and wanted to share was the Protected Users Security Group. And what's awesome about this, so this is a security group, and this is from the TechNet page, right? So, quote, this security group is designed as part of a strategy to effectively protect and manage credentials within the enterprise. Members of this group automatically have non-configurable protections applied to their accounts. Membership in the protected users group is meant to be restrictive and proactively secure by default. The only method to modify these protections for an account is to remove the account from the security group. So what you can do is you can take these highly privileged user accounts, toss them into this group, and it's secure by default. So what that means, those accounts are prohibited from authenticating using NTLM. Right there, a lot of the weak hashing and cracking taken care of there. The Kerberos pre-authentication negotiations will not use the weaker DES or RC4 encryption types. That's awesome. The user account can't be delegated with unconstrained delegation, right? That's great. Really controlling where the account can be used. And the Kerberos TGT has a lifetime setting of 4 hours. So every 4 hours, the user has to re-authenticate. That ticket can't be essentially sprayed around the network. No one is in this group by default. You'll want to certainly read the references here. And there are some restrictions. So Windows Server 2012 R2 domain functional level, and any of the devices being Windows 8.1 or newer. With the upcoming end of life dates in January, that shouldn't be an issue for most folks. Definitely something worth looking into. Continuing the theme of protecting, this authentication and these credential sets, the authentication policy silos. So what this is, Active Directory can actually have these containers where you can assign different user groups, computer accounts, service accounts, etc., to these silos. And within that, you can have different authentication policies for each of those silos, right? So rather than having to worry about tracking what resources are needed for different accounts and prevent, malicious use of those credentials, you can start to bucket these items. So really cool, especially when you're looking at having a silo for privileged accounts. Defining stronger authentication policies using a risk-based approach. Really awesome stuff there. So then in the GIAC email boards, there's a bunch of emails bouncing around about different tools you can use to essentially check on your Active Directory security. And one of the free tools that popped up was Pingcastle, pingcastle.com, pingcastle.com. Free to use in your own environment. They do charge if you're using it as a consultant or using it in other folks' environments. But what this does is essentially performs a bunch of checks and scores your environment based on what it's seeing as far as ACLs, password rotations, different common issues in Active Directory environments. But the great part is the report you get out of running the tool, which only takes a few minutes. It links to all the references for the remediation activities. So you can take this tool, you can run it, you get a risk score, similar to the Azure security score, right? Here's, okay, you're severely at risk, but here's the 5 things you can do to bump that up to pretty secure. So that was an awesome tool to play around with, in a lab domain and really look at how informative the references are. Another tool that was kind of cool that popped up in the email board was Deep Blue CLI, which is on GitHub. It's on the Sans Blue Team GitHub page, so I'll definitely link to that in the show notes. This is essentially a PowerShell module used for threat hunting the Windows event logs. So there's a lot of good resources there for actually pulling out some of the interesting information you have buried in the event logs and getting back to pulling out that information. Another really interesting resource that I'm sure everyone's aware of, but in case you're not, adsecurity.org, incredible reference, right? So this is Sean Metcalf's site. Anytime I've got a question about AD security, I tend to search here first. The articles they put up on there and all the references, absolutely incredible. Um, if for nothing else, go take a look at his slides from his Black Hat talk this year, attacking and defending the Microsoft cloud. Um, Sean had a talk with, I believe his name was Mark, from Microsoft, where they went back and forth and they highlighted all these common attack vectors against the Microsoft cloud that they're seeing, and then paired that up with all the defensive controls available within Azure. So really great content there. Again, adsecurity.org. Another GitHub project that popped up in some of the email exchanges was Seatbelt. So this is on the Ghost Pack GitHub page. So this is, again, pulling a lot of Active Directory and Windows settings. But it's interesting because they've designed it both for in the eyes of an attacker, so looking for things you can exploit, but also highlighting things for the blue team, as far as what you need to look for. So looking at things like saved credentials, looking at recent run commands for indications of malicious activity, looking for saved credentials, insecure configurations and user environment variables. A lot of good information can be pulled from this, and definitely worth taking a look at as far as even just the basic safety checks in your environment. A lot of good information coming out of that. The last thing I want to talk about is, what's next with my SANS journey, I guess if we want to call it that. The next class I'm in, I actually started about a week ago, was SEC 566, implementing and auditing the critical security controls in depth. So this is the CIS critical security controls, not only an overview of what the controls are, but how do you actually implement these controls in an environment? How do you test for control effectiveness? What sort of tools are available? And really, if you're going to implement this set of controls, which I certainly stand behind the CIS critical security controls, this class was one that makes sense. How can we effectively deploy these controls, and then more importantly, effectively monitor them? So certainly, interested in what the end result of this class will be. One of the cool notes is the course instructor is actually one of the folks that maintains the critical security controls, so you're getting it straight from the horse's mouth, right? Whoever is responsible for maintaining the controls is actually contributing to the course content, which is awesome. I'll certainly try and post some updates as I work through the material. Still early on in the class, where we're just going over what the controls are, what actually makes up the sub controls, the history and all that, rather than the actual automation and tool sets to support the controls. But I do a lot of work with the critical security controls in my day job. So I am really hoping that there's some new stuff coming out of here, especially in the automation and monitoring of the controls, that I can then pass on to some of my clients that are also implementing the CIS critical security controls. That's really all I have for you, with this episode. That was my final conference of the year. So hopefully I can get back to, writing some more blog posts with some of the things I'm learning. Now that travel's slowing down a bit. Again, show notes, that I kind of went through a lot of this pretty quick and at a high level. I don't want to just read through, these white papers for you. SeanGoodwin.blog/STS004. I link to everything there. And as usual, let me know if there's anything you'd like to comment on, correct me on, talk about. I'm all ears. The reason why I started recording this and writing the blog was to not only help me solidify, the things I'm learning and lock it into my memory, but, to reach out to other folks in the industry and figure out, who else I can learn from and what other things I can learn. So certainly feel free. All the contact information, again, in the show notes. Until next time, I will talk to you later.